Right, well, first of all, welcome to Kipscombe Farm. My name's Josey. I'm the project ranger / farm manager here, and it is absolutely fantastic to see so many interested faces. When we first talked about doing a facilitation day, I kind of expected maybe 20 people if we were lucky. So when I was told it was going to be 40 to 50, I was quite blown away. So I hope you all get what you need from this. So I just wanted to start off by situating Kipscombe Farm in the wider landscape. This is us here. So Kipscombe's around Fallen Point, Countersbury area. And it is part of a 4,500 acre National Trust estate that runs the coastal strip kind of from County Gates down to Combe Martin, and we also look after 2 wooded valleys, so the Watersmeet Valley and also the Heddon Valley. So it's quite a large area. Here on the farm, most days it's myself, Andrew Leeworthy, who is our stockman, and he's lived in the area his whole life and farmed his whole life. And also we have Finley, our academy ranger, who's kind of like our apprentice, he's learning. But we also do draw upon the wider team for help as and when we need it. That also means that we get drawn upon to help the wider team as well. So, our work schedule is fairly busy here. I also wanted to flag this because, as you can see, this red area here is the Honeycott estate. So that side is Somerset Exmoor. And at the moment we have a project running that is looking to link up Devon Exmoor with Somerset Exmoor. And my colleague Dan here is going to talk to a bit more about that after I've spoken. And that's mainly because essentially we're looking to plant lots of trees. And so if you're farming in that area, there's potential for some money, for some help through Dan's project. So he might be worth speaking to if you're interested in that afterwards. So as I said, Kipscombe Farm is part of a much wider National Trust estate, but we make up 357 hectares of that, so about 880 acres. And we are essentially a coastal strip, but we span the A39. So all of this land here belongs to the farm, as does all of this land here. The Watersmeet estate, although owned by the National Trust, isn't considered part of Kipscombe Farm at the moment. We are essentially 7 enclosed blocks of semi-improved pasture. And those blocks are all surrounded by heathland. We do have a couple of wooded combes that span across the property, but the main areas of woodland are along the coastal strips, and obviously our neighbour, which is the Watersmeet woodland, is heavily wooded. But at the moment, as you'll see as we walk around, there aren't actually that many trees on the farm. And in most places, they are kind of monocultures of habitats. So we either have grass or we have heathland, and that's pretty much it. So in terms of wildlife value, although Exmoor is amazing, and I don't want to downplay how incredible it is, because it really is, but it could be so much better. It really could be. So just to give you a bit of background and history to the farm, so in 2017, Kipscombe Farm came back into National Trust, well, we call it in hand. So essentially, before that, the farm was tenanted. So the land belonged to the National Trust, but for 20 odd years, there'd been somebody here farming it. He left in 2017, and so then that sparked a decision process. What are we going to do with this big area of land? It came at a time when, I don't know how much people know about National Trust strategy, but at the moment we have a strategy called Land Outdoors and Nature. And it was basically the Trust recognising that it had vast swathes of the countryside in its ownership. And some of that land could be a lot better for wildlife. So it's the Trust basically saying we have all this outdoor land and we need to improve it for its wildlife, its conservation value. It's also at a time when subsidies, who knows what's happening with that, you know, none of us know, do we, but potential loss of subsidies. And so the decision was made to farm Kipscombe in hand, A, because we thought we could have the wildlife gains, but also B, we thought it was unfair to ask a tenant to come in here and farm this land in the way that we would be asking them to do it, you know, given the kind of the conservation aspect of it, with also subsidy loss on the horizon. So we have the farm now. The Kipscombe Long project is a 3-year project. It started in 2018, and so it's 2018, so it's due to run to about 2021. And essentially, it's setting things up, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. And then going on from that, a decision will be made as to whether we carry on farming it in hand or we have a tenant come in. So, what is our vision for the farm? Well, as I said, first and foremost, we are a conservation charity, and so we want to make this farm, this area of land, the absolute best it can be for wildlife, nature, and for people. And when we sat down and we looked at things, we did loads of different kind of soil testing, and there was a huge decision-making process that went into this. We decided that the best thing we could do is plant trees and use grazing as a sustainable way to deliver our conservation goals. Now, this farm does have to be economically sustainable. Again, I don't know how much people know about National Trust finances, but we are classed on West Exmoor as a deficit property, which means we don't make money. We do get a small amount of central funding every year to help with our conservation, but essentially everything we do over and above the basics, we have to go out and find funding for. So that's either external funding, as lots of you might be applying for, or there is some amount of internal funding as well to be had. At the moment, this farm does have an HLS and an ELS, but obviously, again, you know, we need to find ways to make this farm viable, because in the future, who knows what's going to happen with that. We also want to use this farm as a way of demonstrating that wildlife and farming can go hand in hand. They absolutely can. Farming gets a lot of bad press at the moment, and actually, you know, a lot of the time that's because a particular model of farming is taken and touted. And I think that, you know, there are other ways of doing it, and there are ways that are better for people and for wildlife and for the animals that live here. And so, you know, that's something we're really keen on promoting with this project. So as I said, what we're looking to do is essentially holistic rotational grazing within a wood pasture system. So that's the big vision. Once you've got your big vision, you need a plan, because you need to know how you're going to implement these things. Essentially, this is part of our plan. So, as I said, we have blocks of semi-improved grassland across the farm, and this plan we expect to be able to roll out into all of those blocks. Now, some of the farm is flatter and some of it is steeper, as you're going to find out in about an hour and a half, I guess. The flatter parts we are going to split into smaller paddocks. We're going to do that by planting shelter belts of trees. So all these dotted lines you see are going to be 10-metre shelter belts of trees. Also, these blocked out green lines are going to have trees behind them as well. So you can see where the original field boundaries are. We're going to plant trees in between those field boundaries, and then we're going to split the fields with these shelter belts. That's so that we can rotationally graze the animals. These blocks of flatter ground, so I guess one thing to say is this is still wood pasture, it's just not wood pasture as you might envision it. It's not big open grown standards in a parkland environment. This is still trees with animals grazing underneath it. These flatter parts that have been split into paddocks, we're then going to fence, because we have a rather substantial deer population who would probably quite like to eat some of these trees, and we want to give them the best possible start in life. So we're going to deer fence around the outside of these blocks. The thing to say about all of our fencing is it's going to be electric. So all of the internal fences are going to be electric, and the external fence, the deer fence, is also going to be electric. The deer fence is something that we're going to be trialling. So my boss, Kev Davies, he used to work up in Mar Lodge where they had a big deer problem, and they tried this type of fencing and it worked for them, so we're going to try it here. Basically, and I can talk to anybody in a bit more detail about it if you're interested later on, but it's offset electric fencing. So the highest strand is about 5 foot. So you have 3 strands of electric fencing. The lowest strand is at the front, and then you have 2 higher strands behind it. And the idea is that the deer they're inquisitive, they'll come and they'll look at the fence, they'll try and put their heads over it, see if they can jump it, they'll get a bolt off the fence, and then they won't touch it again. As I said, this is something that's worked incredibly well up in Mar Lodge, and it's something that we're gonna try here. So that's our holistic grazing, our rotational grazing areas. These outer areas we're going to leave as extensive grazing. So this will again be wood pasture, but instead of the big treed shelter belts, we're going to have blocks of trees. So we're going to plant blocks of 15 by 15 metres, and that will eventually, hopefully, in 50, 100 years, well past my lifetime I'm sure, be those big open grown standards that you're more used to seeing in a parkland setting. As I said, we've got about 7 blocks where we're going to roll this out in various different fashions. So obviously, each bit of land is different, and we're having to walk all of that and see what suits that bit of land. So some of the blocks are going to have more of the rotational grazing, some of them are probably going to have more of the extensive grazing. It just depends on the land and what we think would work best within that. So why are we doing it? Why go through all the trouble of planting all these trees and the holistic grazing? First of all, there's the benefits to nature. At the moment, as I said, we've got the Watersmeet woodland on one edge, we've got the coastal woodland on the other edge, and we've got absolutely nothing really connecting the two. So in terms of habitat connection, in terms of those corridors that nature can use to move around, we have to plant more trees. It's just, we have to. And then there's all the things that come with that. If you think what you'd like from a home, nature really wants the same things. It wants somewhere safe to nest. It wants somewhere to feed and get its, to feed itself and feed its young. It wants somewhere to hibernate. All of those things are important, and different animals need different things. Some of them will benefit having that longer grass. On cue. Some of them will benefit from having that longer grass, some of them will benefit from having those trees in the landscape. Benefits, public services. This is going to be a big one for everybody going forward, I should think, especially the way the Elms trials seem to be going. Trees in a landscape, rotational grazing, everything points to more organic matter in the soil. You've got more organic matter, you can hold more water. With trees in the landscape, you've got better carbon sequestration and reduction in runoff. This is something that we do all have a responsibility for. We have combs that run through the farm, and we don't want to be sending all our soil down into them and off into the Bristol Channel or down into the East Lynn. And having trees in a landscape and I don't want to go into too much detail about the mechanics of holistic rotational grazing and trees in the landscape, but if you are more interested in the kind of mechanics of it, please do. And I think maybe Lindsay might be saying a bit more about it. But yeah, if you do want to know more about it, then please do, because we walk around to come and have a chat, because it is just it can only be good, and they're things that we are going to be asked more and more to do if you want money for farming going forward. Benefits to the animals, obviously, as people who care for animals, this is big, this is top of our agenda. We want them to have the best bites of grass. We want those good live weight gains on them, because at the end of the day, as I said, it's got to be sustainable economically. So, we want those animals to be getting the best forage they can. Having trees in a landscape means they have a much more diverse diet. There is a lot of talk about how animals will self-medicate if they're offered the chance of a more diverse diet. I know so as you'll see walking around, we're at the very, very early stages of this project, so we haven't planted any trees yet, but we do have some willow trees in our hedgerows, and I've seen our cows, when they're moved into paddocks, they'll go straight for the trees. They'll just strip them out, and they're looking for that diversity in their diet. The trees offer them much better shelter. Some parts of this farm are 300 metres above sea level, and it's horrendously exposed in the summer and in the winter, and so trees offer them that shelter they need. And if your animals are happier, and this might sound a bit, but if animals are happier, they're gonna have better weight gains. It's like when you're happy, your body's happier, isn't it? We all kind of notice that, and it's no different for these animals. So we are lucky here because we have a sandy loam, so we're very free draining, so we don't get that kind of the water and the poaching that you might get in winter. So the animals are able to outwinter, they can stay out all year. But also the rotational grazing for those people who don't have that, those kind of soils, it can really help with the water retention and the water drainage in your soils. So possibly the animals can stay out for a bit longer than they might be now. And that's just a benefit for them because, they're not nose to nose all the time in sheds in the winter, so the disease risk is much lower. Reduction in flies, more invertebrates on the land, especially the dung beetles are absolutely brilliant because they have the fly larvae away. So, that's a definite other benefit to the animals. And pasture fed, their stomach biome. Cows get such a bad press, and a lot of it is based on these big feedlot animals who are fed cereals, But if we're pasture feeding the animals, they're eating a diet that their stomachs have actually evolved to deal with. So they're not pumping out all the gases that we're led to believe they are. Also, their biome is much more balanced. So the bacteria that's in their stomach, some of that comes out in their poo, and then that helps the soil because then that's the bacteria in the soil that's helping to deliver much healthier soils. So really the benefits to the animals of these systems are just, they're 100-fold really. And finally, benefits to the farm business. Like I said, we're not here as the National Trust to make a lot of money, but the farm does have to wipe its nose. And so this is a concern for us. This is something that I have to balance. Having the animals outwintered obviously lowers your costs immediately because you're not having to pay for their feed, you're not having to pay for their bedding, you're not having to empty sheds out or worry where all their manure is going. It's a low input system. So it's minimum intervention, so obviously that's lowering your time with the animals, so your cost in kind of wages, and we're not really medicating the animals. The only thing these guys get is we have a huge tick burden here, and we have to treat for that because otherwise we do start losing animals. The cows have their spot on, and the sheep have their crowbeck. And they do have some vaccines before they go to the bull, but other than that, we don't treat for anything. Heritage breeds. So heritage breeds are much better suited to these systems. There's no doubt about that. And yes, they do take a little bit longer to finish. But having said that, I think there's two things in that. They might take a bit longer to finish, but the meat quality is incredible. The fat is actually marbled through the meat, so it cooks in a much different way and has a much more distinctive flavour. And you know, these heritage breeds, if you market it in the right way, they can absolutely command a premium. Biomass as a product, I think Rob's potentially going to talk about this a bit later, but actually, you know, how can you make the most of the trees that you're growing in your landscape? How can you make some money out of that? And also, you know, there's this cutting tree hay. They're all options, you know. So tree hay is where we're pollarding the trees, and then we're using that, we're harvesting that growth to feed to the animals in the winter months. It's kind of a method that was used quite traditionally, and one that is sort of pretty much died out now. But again, you know, it's something to try. So challenges and thinking points. So this sounds like a wonderful system, and there's tons and tons of benefits to it. But of course there are some challenges and things to think about. The first one is designations. So for example, we sit in the national park. We also have triple SIs, the sites of special scientific interest, and we also have archaeological sites. So they're all things that you need to consider before you maybe start planting trees or changing the landscape in any way. Now we found generally having those open conversations with the right people, you know, the way things are going, we are going to get asked to plant more trees. As it stands at the moment, some of these designations are slightly outdated, but change is coming, and they're things that once we start pushing towards, you know, the lie of the land is going to start to change. But just having those open, honest conversations with people like Natural England, the RPA, you know, just kind of flagging that you're going to be doing these things. Suitability. So one thing to say is when we took the farm over, we took on 250 Welsh Mountain ewes, which are now all gone, and the Exmoor ponies, which I'm sure most of you probably saw as you were driving in. So we didn't already have a system in place. We're starting completely from scratch, and this is what we decided to do. If you are already farming and you are looking to change, you know, there is this question of suitability of animals and that crossover period, like how are you going to change your farm over? They're all things to think about, especially in terms of the farm finances. You know, there's tree planting comes with a cost. You know, trees are pretty cheap. It's fencing if you have deer and fencing from the animals. So they're all things to think about, you know, the finances of it. One thing I would say is I came to this project and you're kind of really excited because you're doing this new thing and it's really, you know, like, let's get going. And then you're suddenly like, hang on, the realisation hits that actually this is a long-term project. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. And so it's having that forethought, you know. You might not have the finances now to do everything all in one go, but it could be that you just have the finances to just change slowly and work with grants and just, you know, just transition yourself. Because time is another big thing as well. Time to put fences in, time to plant trees. As I said, we work within a much wider national trust team, and so, you know, we are balancing our time all the time because we're trying to do stuff on the farm, we're also trying to help the wider estate, and it's no different for anyone else who is farming. You know, time is precious, and so I think what I'm trying to say is, you know, just have realistic goals, have realistic expectations of yourself. All these things are brilliant things to do, but they're just going to take time and money and a bit of effort to do. So, where are we now? Right, well, as I said, we went from taking the farm over with 250 Welsh Mountains and pretty much no fences on the farm. None of the blocks were particularly well enclosed. Pretty much all of our blocks now are stock-proof, and we have 41 longhorn cattle on site. We have 80 clean sheep. I'm hoping that some of these you'll see as we go around. We have the Exmoor ponies, which I think most of you have been introduced to already. We are in the very early stages of starting to put fencing in, and when we go for a walk we will see some of that. And we have also been experimenting with the rotational grazing by just using the temporary electric fences, so just to move the animals around. We found, coming back to the time element of things again, we found that we've had time to experiment with some of it, and that's been great. But actually, while we're putting the more long-term fencing in, it has been easier for us to keep the animals in the larger fields, just because, again, you know, we have a limited number of people working here, and it is just time to get things going.